Mob Psycho 100 returns for a Monster of the Week style episode, and it involves the ring-inspired creature, the Dragger. This might be an unpopular opinion, but my favorite episodes of Mob Psycho 100 are not the overarching story, it's the random adventures that Mob and Reagan always go on, going to a brand new location, learning about some weird mysterious creature, the history behind it, and having a big epic psychic battle with it. And that's what this entire episode was all about. It was just so damn fun to see. I love these crazy little adventures, and I hope that we're going to get to see more of them in the second season. And don't get me wrong, I do want to see more of the overarching story, the battles with Claw, and how Mob is eventually going to be able to tame his very own psychic powers. But for now, I'm just going to enjoy these super wacky adventures fighting against crazy urban legend-styled monsters. And this episode right here certainly played with the idea of the urban legend. Almost every single culture, every single place, city, town, province actually has some sort of story regarding an urban legend. Whether it's something miraculous happening, the appearance of a crazy monster, it's something that always gets ingrained in culture, and sometimes it can get so ingrained to where it actually becomes a part of the cultural identity of a place. As crazy as it might seem, it's actually almost made real by the overall beliefs of a lot of people. And that just so happens to be the theme of this episode of Mob Psycho 100, as Reagan and Mob decide to go to this town where they're going to try and find this monster, which is known as the Dragger. It's some sort of ancient urban legend where whenever it's raining or it's wet outside or you're near water, there is the potential that some weird creepy woman is going to appear from the shadows or the alleys and quite literally just drag you away to a watery grave. It's a real ghastly image when you actually think about it, but it totally sounds like any other urban legend you'd hear in any other town that you would go in, and it ends up becoming one of the creepiest episodes of the series. This episode is also notable for introducing a brand new character, a real psychic who goes by the name of Bansho Maru, who, like a lot of the other characters in the series, just looks funny as shit. He's a really great character, and he has a really funny rivalry with Reagan as he takes his job a lot more seriously, and he does have some form of psychic skill, being able to use these prayer beads to wrap up demons, or at least that's the appearance that it actually gives. They glow purple when it happens, so you have to assume there's some sort of weird supernatural shit going on with this guy, but mostly he just finds himself getting in a really bad situation when these characters just decide to split up looking for this Dragger-like creature, and Reagan gives orders to Dimple to basically stay with him the entire time, so if something bad happens, he can inhabit his body and he can protect him. And of course, bad things freaking happen. The introduction of the Dragger is absolutely horrifying. It all actually kicks off when Banshamaru is actually being accosted by this one douchebag who's constantly trying to attack him and stab him and kill him, only for him to eventually get taken by this ghoulish creature, which looks like the girl from The Ring, all slimy, wet, and gray, and she ends up just dragging this dude into the water, only to immediately starting to attack Banshamaru. This is when Dimple decides he has to take over and use his body to fight, and what might be one of the most satisfying action scenes I've actually seen from the series. I can't do the scene any justice as it's just so well animated with so much style, speed, and fluidity. You kind of have to see it for yourself, but I love it because even though Dimple is kind of a goofy character and on the inside, I truly do hate him, he is really fun to watch, I have to admit, and he does have some skills, although it's really strange seeing him push this guy to his limit, and even ends up getting hurt really bad with his Achilles tendon getting cut. Pretty gruesome stuff when you think about it. However, these demons are here to be exorcised, and that's when Reagan and Mob appear, and just like many of the other battles in the series, Mob appears and just absolutely destroys this thing without really even trying at all. Again, it's another like big spectacle of pure awesome animation, the way that it's actually done, especially when this creature transforms into a massive version of itself, almost looking like a giant face mixed with a wave as it's about to swallow all of them and drag them into the depths. But no, Mob's just like, boom, you're dead. Now, I've talked about all of that so that I could talk about what is probably the best scene of the entire episode, and that's the introduction of what might be the most horrifying urban legend of all time. Every time I say to myself, Japan, can you get any weirder? Yeah, they actually end up doing that. That's what they did in this episode of Mob Psycho 100. After solving the real freaking mystery of the Dragger, they go after one more urban legend myth, and that's of Dash Granny, who is this old woman who just sort of runs down the street and in these tunnels, and if you come face to face with her, well, you're going to meet your immediate doom. What's really funny about all of this is that they actually do end up finding an old woman who's running like fucking Sonic the Hedgehog through this tunnel, and she manages to be both horrifying and hilarious all at the same time, and ultimately it results in nothing. It's just an old woman running in a very hilarious fashion. And if laughing at old people running like Sonic the Hedgehog is wrong, then I don't want to be right. So what's the rundown on this episode of Mob Psycho 100? 5 out of 5, just for Dash Granny alone. Bonshomaru being possessed by Dimple and fighting against a weird, creepy version of the girl from The Ring, it was something that I didn't think I was ever going to want to see, but damn, they just pulled it off in this episode with so much gusto, so much style, and so much humor. The comedic timing of this show, guys, is so pitch perfect. It doesn't feel forced, and it actually seems like it's written more for comedy than the actual story and the action. And I think that's always what's been such a great thing about Mob Psycho 100. It knows that it's a wacky, crazy Japanese cartoon, and it totally rolls with it. But it still manages to have a surprising amount of class with its storytelling and its character development. But again, this was a pretty simple episode. This was kind of like those random one-off episodes of The Twilight Zone where Mulder and Scully go to find a monster, they see it, they defeat it, that's the end of the episode, say a funny line, roll the credits. That's pretty much exactly what this whole experience was right here, but I really liked it a lot, and it reminded me that I kind of love all of those random one-off episodes from this series for how stylistic and fun and ultimately how timeless they can end up becoming. And, of course, it's just another great dive into the ridiculousness of everything that is Japanese culture and how they can create these crazy urban legends and myths about these weird women who drag you away. It's very creepy, and it shows they've always had a great amount of creativity. And this episode right here just absolutely bled that with its comedic timing, its amazing action, and its fantastic ending with Dash Granny. I cannot speak for that enough. As it turns out, I didn't have an opportunity to review this episode before the new one came out, so guess what? You guys are going to be getting 2 episode reviews of Mob Psycho 100. And this is another fantastic episode where Mob comes to a moral crossroads, where he realizes that a lot of these supernatural creatures that he's been slaying are not exactly all evil. It's another one of those episodes which takes the famous Ben Parker phrase, "With great power comes great responsibility." Even though you have supernatural superpowers, should you use them for good? Should you use them for bad? And should you just use them frivolously in everyday life? This is something that Mob has constantly battled with throughout the course of the entire series. 1, because he just wants to live a normal life, and 2, because he's afraid he's eventually going to lose control of his power, and if he does so, that could take him to somewhere that he's never ever going to be able to return from. The good thing is, while this episode does have some pretty big serious moments attached to it, it's also another just hilarious episode of the series. We get to learn that after Reagan and Mob set up their brand new website, that it's actually really successful, and he's been getting a lot of calls for work. In fact, what's really great about this episode is that there are 3 separate jobs that both Mob and Reagan end up working on, and they just sort of escalate in how ridiculous they get as the actual episode goes on. With the first guy just arriving to Reagan's office, demanding that he gives him the ability to curse someone for some unknown reason. It's ridiculous and it's over the top, and Reagan says, well, that's not kind of the thing that we do here, but in order to get this guy out of the office as quick as possible, he just writes up this quick curse tag and hands it to him, hoping that eventually this won't end up biting him in the ass. It ends up biting him in the ass. Just not in a really bad way. It mostly just results in him getting cursed and Dimple getting a free snack, being able to devour it. The second case that they go on is where things get a little more interesting, and I honestly thought that they were going to go in a much bigger direction with this, where they get this call from this woman who has this stalker who's continuously appearing outside of her window. The thing is, she's like in a high-rise apartment. There's no way that any human would have the ability to just sort of float outside her window, so they immediately feel that it's probably some sort of ghost or supernatural creature, and they actually do discover that there is something out there, except that it's not from something that's dead. It's from an actual living being. It's from her neighbor, who seems to have the special ability to project his, like, outlined image to spy on people, and it's all because he was in love with his next-door neighbor. It makes no sense, it's ridiculous, and it's mostly played for laughs because this poor woman is just so terrified about the fact that there is someone stalking her that could potentially kill her, or maybe even worse. Her fear immediately turns into disgust and the fact that she could have probably taken this guy out herself. It's a really funny moment, but again, both Mob and Reagan do end up doing their job. It's the third story arc where things start to get a little heavier. Reagan is approached by these 3 college kids who are planning to make some sort of big graduation video, and they want to do something really exciting. They want to go to a haunted site and potentially maybe even capture some ghosts on camera, and they figure actually going to someone who is a psychic would be the best means of making that happen. Reagan reluctantly decides, okay, I'll bite. Let's check this out. They end up driving out into the countryside, which is pitch black dark. They arrive to this weird haunted place where seemingly nothing happens. They get themselves a picture, and that's the end of the day. Except for the fact that they're really pissed off that not really anything happened and that Reagan didn't have to use his psychic abilities to take out any ghosts. They find themselves being a little too entitled and, of course, a little too upset that they didn't get their money's worth, and they quite literally just lose these guys and abandon them in the middle of this, dark forest. It's really messed up, and to make matters even shittier, they return halfway at the end of the episode to say, look, we took that picture and we found this creepy ghost kid who's hanging out next to us, and we want you to kill it. Why they want this to actually happen, I have no idea. Just the overall thought of living and knowing that there is some sort of ghost in the world, I think, is what drives them to do this. But really, it just comes across as a little paranoid, to be perfectly honest. And I don't know why, but Reagan's like, okay, you guys abandoned us before, but fuck it, let's go try this again. And they end up going back to the site where they eventually do learn that there are a group of spirits which are there. And unlike the other supernatural things that we've seen in Mob Psycho 100, these ghosts are not exactly evil. And they're not like Dimple either. Even though Dimple's kind of a goofball, he still has the potential to actually be a bad guy. But the ghosts that we see in this episode are actually a family of 3, a mother, a father, and a child. And basically this is a case of a ghost existing on the earth that still has unfinished business and desires. They have things that they have to fulfill on this plane before eventually they can cross over. But the thing is, all of these 3 douchebag college kids want these things to be destroyed. But Mob himself finds himself in the middle of the road saying, well, they're not really bad. They're not doing anything wrong. But at the same time, the customer is always right. It's such an interesting moment, and Reagan really makes it clear when he says that Mob is a character who is able to coexist with supernatural creatures as well as living humans. And that sort of puts him in this moral area where he has to make the call, and ultimately he decides that he's not going to allow these things to be hurt and decides to just let them leave. Reagan appeases the 3 people by throwing salt in their face, which is incredibly funny, and he even manages to charge him for it. I guess that's the ultimate revenge. Now, while that scene, I think, was one of the better parts of the entire episode, I think my favorite scene is one that didn't really even involve that much supernatural stuff at all. It was just a random one-off scene of watching Mob walk home after school, and he suddenly gets accosted by these 2 bullies who are demanding money from him. Of course, he doesn't have any cash on him at all, and these guys just do the stereotypical anime douchebag thing of trying to beat him up and rough him up and take his money. But Dimple takes over and he jumps inside this guy's body and manages to make him just strip naked in the middle of nowhere, which is funny because, one, the dude doesn't know it happens and he's completely confused as to why it keeps going down. But it's made even funnier when we get the arrival of a ton of other side characters from the series. He is also stopped by his brother Ritsu, who appears, who shows he's still quite proficient with his psychic abilities, and it's still really cool to actually see him in action. But it's when the Body Improvement Club shows up that things get really awesome. I almost wish there was an entire series all about these guys, as they are just fucking hilarious in every way. They could have done the stereotypical thing where they just beat this guy up, but literally all they do is just sort of bow up on him, put their chests out, and they slowly just sort of corner him into this circle, and they basically just crush this guy with their giant muscular bodies. We even get to see the return of that one pompadour asshole from the beginning of the very first season, showing that he still is a part of the club, and he's still actually getting some solid characterization, where he started out as a stereotypical bully, but he's here, just like all of these other people, to simply help out Mob. They know he's a unique individual and he has a lot of hidden potential, and they want to help him bring that out. That's what I think was really great about this scene, and honestly kind of heartwarming. Mob's got a lot of really good allies, and some very close friends who genuinely just want to be there for him and to help him out. It's another one of those moments where he realizes that he doesn't always have to rely on his powers as long as he has his friends. It's a really cheesy message, but honestly, it works really well in this episode. So, What's the rundown on this episode of Mob Psycho 100? As I was saying before, this is just sort of like a collective of so many different stories that are going on. The first two being the really funny ones, and the last one being the one that's meant to be taken a little more serious. But really, this episode does a great job of highlighting the turmoil that Mob is going through every single day. He's still not quite sure what he should do. Should he focus on his powers, focus on being a normal human? Can he even be a normal human with the fact that he has to make choices of destroying a ghost family or appeasing the customer if they get pissed off enough? It's that type of drama that actually works really well in this show. That, and of course, it's still uproariously funny. I mean, the facial expressions and the designs of some of the characters in this show just absolutely put the biggest fucking smile on my face. I love that for it. How, even though it can manage to get pretty serious at times, it still manages to be a comedy series at its core. And it manages to work every single time. I mean, man, there are just some of the greatest expressions, and the way that they do them in the art style in this episode just really sells this one right here. Really, this was another fantastic episode of the series, and so far this season has been a pretty great mixture of like Monster of the Week style storytelling as well as some really good subtle characterization, and it's been working so far, although I have to admit I am sort of ready for the main story to kick into high gear, and it looks like we're not going to have to wait too long. Looks like the next episode is going to be delivering just that. Or maybe it's just going to be another wacky adventure. The good thing is, you're not going to lose. Every single time, Mob Psycho 100 always manages to be entertaining, funny, and surprisingly heartfelt. And doing it with like a big smile on its face and not being pretentious about any of it. So I'm going to give this episode right here a solid 4 out of 5. Another great episode right here. I think it was a little all over the place with some of its storytelling, especially the first half of the episode, but it still managed to make me laugh. And if anything, a 4 out of 5 is still a fantastic score. So there it is. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts about this episode. You can tell me all of them in the comments section below, and what you hope to see from the rest of Mob Psycho 100. Thank you all for watching this review. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay down, baby.